a very warm welcome you back to this program, ThinkTech Hawaii, and this show, Humane Architecture. This happening to be the 364th, so it's almost like if we would have done a show every day in a year. So that's the number, easy to remember. And we're broadcasting live to playlist here in Honolulu, Hawaii, but from near around Munich. And our guest today is the one and only, and we thought she would be a phantom, but she's not, because here she is, Bilge Kobas. Bilge, so nice to finally have you on the program.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really happy to be here.
So we've been thinking quite a bit what to do. And actually, if you came back to see us talking about Valencia, we have to disappoint you, but for good reason, because we found something better. We thought we're just going to be brave and really talk about what you would love to talk about and to share the most, which you said you never really got or took the chance to the degree that you would have liked. And so how would you describe that? And for the ones looking at the screen, it has to do with what's sort of circled in red here next to you, which is in your SenseLab at the Technical University of Munich, the chair of building technology and climate responsive design, and you with your laboratory there. So what's that thing that interests you maybe even more than all the other things that everyone likes and loves you for at that chair?
Actually, that's a really funny photo that you picked, and it tells the entire story. As you said, the SenseLab with the sensors and cables inside it is at the center of the photo, which is also my main research since the last 5 years. It is a climate chamber where we do human experiments to understand how thermal environments impact the human physiology. But the red highlighted part on the very side, almost like in a place where it's hidden and no one will actually see, it's not in the center, but it's really at the back of my mind. It's a tailor's dummy. And it is there exactly for the topic that we're about to take on today, that research that I have been missing, that's always been somewhere in my head, but could never, like in this photo, could never take the center stage so far. So since you and I connected on that, hopefully in the next months, maybe we would have some chances to finally focus on it. As I said, it's a tailor's dummy, so it's not about architecture, it's not about building engineering, it's not about the typical climatization methods that we architects think of. It is clothing, because with everything that we do in that lab and the entire chair of building technology, or the field of building technology, may even be completely obsolete if we actually solved most of the problems at that scale. Maybe it's as simple as that, but none of us see it, which both of us agree is a bit of a ridiculous situation. And that's why I think we're both super excited to take it on as a challenge.
Very much so. And if Thomas watches us, hopefully, who got on to Build Simple with Florian Nagler, his colleague at TUM. And this is simplifying building simple. So it's a simpler version of simple. Yeah. And recapping a little bit, up there in the show with Thomas, we were sharing how close you got to that at the Venice Biennale in last summer. Where you made people already experience the limits of the built environment and the absurdity of the built environment. And what I found interesting when I was reading that you said usually it's about thermal comfort, but it's actually not, right? You're not talking about thermal comfort, because that's been a sort of a misinterpreted term, right? Why is that?
So the entire idea behind the SenseLab 2 and all of these projects that we're interested in, it comes from that very fundamental question. This field is called thermal comfort research. The standards, the operations are designed to make sure most of the time we're in a space, we feel thermally comfortable, which is actually ironically described as thermal neutrality. So you don't sweat, you don't shiver, and that's comfort. But comfort is such a short-term perspective. It is what you feel at the time, maybe in the last 15 minutes. It's extremely biased, it's very subjective, and it's on the long run not healthy, which I think should be the goal, to make people resilient and healthy and promote their well-being. And if we target or if we pursue thermal comfort as the goal to achieve in the built environment, then first of all, we ask the wrong question, we define the wrong problem, and then we spend billions, we create a billion-dollar industry to solve the wrong problem in less bad ways. You know, we try to do more efficient machinery, but maybe we don't even need all of it. So we have to really go all the way back to the core question. Is it even about comfort all day, every day, all the time? Come what may, you know, all the machinery that we're using all the time, we don't care. We have to achieve comfort, and then we will become obese. We will have diabetes. We're not going to be able to move. We're not going to be able to age in a healthy way. But I was comfortable in my 30s. Is that the world we want to create, or we have created, but is that the world we still want to keep creating? Or do we really go back and ask, why did we even build shelter? What was even the purpose? And how do we bring the idea of sustainability not just to the building, but also to the human body? Because if you constantly make the human body comfortable, it's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be able to manage itself on the long run. So it will always be addicted to something, which is also stupid.
So you're saying it's maybe, you know, it's like the 3 C's that has always been observing in America in the most extreme, which is convenience, comfort, and commodity.
Exactly.
So it's all about laziness, right? That's what we're talking about. It's like, okay, how can I do everything with the least effort?
Yeah.
To get by with the least effort. So it's like going up in a building is, you know, I have a fossil generator, and that pulls me up vertically, right? Versus originally we were climbing, right? That was the way. I mean, walking up the hill, and if it's too steep, we have to climb up. And so we cut all these inconveniences out, and we think then it's good for us. But you're saying it's actually not.
Well, if it was good for us on the long run, then we wouldn't have gyms. We wouldn't pay to go somewhere else to climb a staircase and, you know, force ourselves to go there, because the body is still evolved to repeat those mechanisms. And if you take it away, now you have to pay to put it back in your body. So it's just ridiculous again.
Yeah. So what we want to do, I think, is encourage and even provoke you, the audience, to come on board, join us. And I have been, when we met, we shared that sort of secret passion of ours that we've been doing simultaneously. And I've been dragging in my previous co-host, DeSoto Brown, into it. And so since this is to lure you to Hawaii, I will just share a little bit of what we have gathered, and would be nice for you to obviously respond and jump in. So you always give your students the task of, when they meet the first time in studio to introduce themselves in like 5 slides. And so this is our way, sort of condense this to one slide and to share sort of our initial, when we were young and kids, and maybe less commodified. We got more and more conditioned then by society. But these are the pictures that De Soto was sharing when he was a little boy and born and raised in Hawaii. He spent some years in boarding school, and look at his face at the bottom left there, in the snow, which he then only through that he really felt what that means, being in the cold. And now, he's been back in Hawaii ever since, and even more appreciating the warmth, even though we're saying, we call Hawaii paradise because it has this perfect equilibrium, right, of our blood having close to 40 degrees Celsius temperature, but then we're heat engines and have excess heat, so ambient temperature can't be like that. It needs to be lower. So whenever that is in equilibrium, we think, this is gonna be it. But we also know from people in the Northern Hemisphere and Scandinavia, right, who rank the highest in happiness, for example, right? So there might actually be a correlation between that, right?
Yeah, sunshine availability, or
yeah. And we should say now, you are trained as an architect at the Technical University in Istanbul, and you had your undergraduate in the core of architecture, but already your graduate studies ventured out of that more into environmental design. And then you continued that at the Architectural Association in London, and then moved on to Munich, where you still are, together with Thomas. So there is obviously, although we seem to be both tired of architecture because architecture has been overdoing it.
Yeah.
But hopefully there are, architects who then also take their clues from how can we basically dress for less. How can we make buildings? Because at the bottom, the indigenous way of Hawaiians, you can also see that as clothing, right? I mean, you even call it thatching, right? Thatching is not like I pour concrete and it's heavy and stereotomic. It's like a cloth that you kind of throw on. And so the gentlemen's back then were just dressed like that. That's pretty much, it does it. It serves all the purposes that it basically needs. So there is a strong, actually, a potential correlation between the two. And so I had asked you also, so hopefully you at some point find the time to say your parents have all your pictures from your childhood, and if you could get them, at some point to give you some, and we want you, the audience, everyone who's watching us, and we should also say that your partner Nick is our biggest fan, always cheerleads us. So we want everyone who watches us and is cheerled by Nick to do the same thing, to just think about how was it before we got basically hijacked by commodification, by capitalism, that we got hooked on, like, okay, I need to buy this new, pair of clothes, and then I need to buy that house, and then I need to buy all these things, right? That all plays into the same kind of pattern topic. Yeah. So this is my homework from that one slide, that thinking about having grown up in temperate, where you have both seasons and you need to bundle up at times, and then you can strip down pretty much. And then how do you deal with that in architecture? And it's also basically plugging into Shift, the movement that Thomas has kicked off together with Christine Lemaitre, where especially the old farts of us, like Thomas and me, Thomas, I'm speaking about myself, are looking at us and realizing how that we went too far. So down there is this preschool that we built for Germany's oldest university in Göttingen, that that gets by with very little to no fossil fuel, but with what expense, right? The whole, effort to do that in being thermal mass, yes, but being out of concrete and having been gotten hooked on a ventilation system. So the building is on a ventilator, right? It's like when you finally end up in the hospital and you got, plugged in, and then it breathes for you, right? While Thomas in his show said architecture used to be breathable, pretty much, and didn't breathe for us. That's pretty much the criticism of the whole passive house. I guess paranoia.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting what you just said, also connected to the previous slide, because we call the building envelope the building skin. So it's another skin, right? So we have the human skin, we have the clothing, and we have the envelope. So we have different skins to mediate this thermal exchange between in and out. And the more we assign that job to the building, the less importance we put on clothing and the actual human skin. So human skin starts to forget what it was capable of doing. And this is something we can clearly show with data from the work we do in the laboratory. And the second skin, the actual second skin, the clothing, is now just a commodity. It doesn't have a function anymore because we assigned all of this function to just the building skin. And then it's really exactly what the human body needs to do. So the human body sends the hot blood through the vessels close to your skin surface to shed the heat. This is what we do with the radiators. We circulate hot water. So when you say the buildings started to breathe for you, that's also something that happens on the entire thermoregulation scale. Everything, the pumps, your heart doesn't need to pump blood anymore because the building is pumping warm liquid for you. So all of it can actually be one-to-one found in the skin mechanism or building mechanisms. I think that's really interesting.
It is very interesting, very fascinating. And then this is sort of sociocultural baggage, I guess, that we Germans, again, needless to say, you're from Turkey because we're born and raised there, and actually born in Izmir, and then grew up in Istanbul and went to school. So then us Germans, I don't know what picture you had of us Germans kind of to begin with, but De Soto is the one who basically said, you Germans are the ones who are so craving for the sun and sunbathing. That all comes from you Germans, And then I immediately went into defense mode and I said, yeah, we have the sun so little, so whenever the sun is out there, we really want to soak it up. And that, as here, that got instrumentalized in our darkest days by the Nazis, who created this sort of Körper body cult, and the Aryans. And then on a much better side, the Bauhaus picked it up, and we can say here we see Fagoswerke by Gropius is certainly sort of the architectural embodiment in a way he just explained it, right? It's basically the demonstration of this sort of sunbathing craving, so to speak, and luckily again, it didn't become what you see at the bottom there. And I actually should have replaced this because your campus or your SenseLab is actually surrounded by the worst of Nazi architecture legacy. So that should have been in there instead of what was proposed for Berlin here. So I think it's really interesting that you can look at this from actually various angles. And what I always like about you, that you really like the interdisciplinary and not the kind of the blindsided architect only view, but that you bring in scientists from other disciplines who have very interesting different angles. Like here, for example, historians, could join in and really bring very valuable insight. And then, and again, luring you to Hawaii. Hopefully next spring we can have you over. So our Dean Moselle needs to watch the show and then get sold on that idea here. Hi Mo, just so he let you know. And so Hawaii is interesting because Thomas initially said, "Oh, that's not interesting." And for the matter that you said, this is like equilibrium. It's too close to where we feel comfortable. So maybe that's like the low-hanging fruit kind of laziness of like, that was his initial reaction. But then having been there and having, thought it over, and again, Paradise, we should say, and Jay is now producing us here, not in front of the camera, but behind the camera. And we should have asked you, Jay, how are you doing? Because we know from the news you had torrential rain for the last weeks, and there's lots of flooding. So down there is, cut off the news, but it says the worst flooding in 20 years. So there is obviously that's a result of our overdoing. I like your point to say, with clothing we can only go so far. We can do puffy coats and high end and chic and haute couture, right?
Yeah.
But we can only overdo it. And there's obviously, fast fashion is really bad. So that's a big environmental burden, but nothing compared to the building industry, how you correctly accused it. That's like exponentially blown out of proportion, the effort we make to just keep us healthy, right? And in fact, we do the opposite. We screw it all up and up to the result of these natural catastrophes there. So
it really is a negative spiral. It's like you have a headache, like a small headache, and then you use 1,000 milligrams of antibiotics every day for the next 3 weeks. It really is that proportion sometimes. And then you become addicted. Your body develops resistance to antibiotics, and the people who actually need antibiotics don't get it. And none of it is good for anyone in the whole system.
And the medical realm and industry as well. And we know how all the healthcare systems are struggling to stay, in place and functioning. So this is another really interesting research angle to the sort of to be enlightened ones in the health industry that wake up and saying, hey, this is a very interesting preventive idea that could help us actually survive our whole business that we're doing.
Yeah, I actually really think this is a public health issue, or either becoming or has become, because when we talk about, this is now a very specific example, but when we talk about heat waves and people dying after the heat waves, it's really not about that particular day and what happened to you on that day, because we have the statistics that we repeat in industrialized areas. We spend about 90% of our time indoors. So if that's the exposure dose you get in such a big amount of your life, such a big amount of time, that is creating your baseline. That is already making you vulnerable or strong. And then when you go through a high stress event like the heat waves, then your body either fails or resists. But the baseline comes from the repeated exposure of your everyday life. So it is the condition that brings you to that high stress moment. It doesn't happen just on that day, it happens throughout. So that's why I think it is actually a public health issue as well.
And thinking about what you just said, how much time we spend indoors, also then, well, was that always the case, right? How about our ancestors
True.
who they had shelter, but very sort of essentialist shelter.
Yeah.
And otherwise, they needed to be out and about, right? And to hunt and to get their food.
Yeah.
So probably statistically, it was reversed. They probably spent most of the time outdoors, or depending on the climate, of course, as well. And that it's also interesting, I think, for architectural historians, maybe like your colleague, Miss Meissner, who had been, studying on Zeebrugge. And I'm thinking of Fry Otto here. That sketch at the bottom left always intrigued me, because that was Fry basically trying to, he had done at the top right, at the IBA in Berlin, his eco village, and he had done that. And but then his other sort of side was obviously the tent guy. And I think the sketches where he desperately tried to say, I'm both. Can't you let me do both? But then again, you see already in the sketch where he was, again, didn't know any better than to glaze it in and make the same kind of sunroom in there in Winter Garden. So it starts again. There is the idea of outdoorsy, of easy breezy, of the absence of architecture, and then we always kind of default back, we architects, into that sort of tragedy. And so when first of all, Bundit is coming in June, and you will get to know him, and he will bring Jack Gilmer with him, who you see there with the show quote there in the right column in the middle. And one of the first shows, so many moons ago, here you can see 330 shows ago, we did with Jack, who lives in a house by an Austrian immigrant who came to Hawaii mid-century, and his name was Alfred Price. And the house at the top left is basically the house that Jack lives in, and that is Alfred Price's first house. And you can see it's almost like literally dropped from Vienna. It looks like a Bauhausian box. And you would say, what does that have to do with Hawaii? And the other pictures are actually his very last house, which is almost, you would say, this is not a house, right? So he really went through this process, then applied to architecture in being overdressed, as also the picture at the second from top on the left with his wife when he came on the boat, and he was very formal in suit and tie. And then you see him there at the right with a button-down shirt where he was, again, stripping and saying, hey, we are in the tropics after all. So I mean, I'm saying even architects, can apply that sort of research that you're offering, even to architecture that the two of us are tired of, but that doesn't mean, everyone else has to be. So there's a wide range of variety of application. That's all I'm trying to offer here, I guess. You will also meet Don Hibbert, who you say you're very excited about what he collects, which are these articles or these advertisements that actually did this sort of false promising from our point of view now, where it was trying to actually, when you read this here, and I remember you got a chuckle out of it when I was reading it to you, because it's like it's a total opposite argumentation. It basically says everything you had said, but through air conditioning, and it's really quite absurd. And then, of course, in Hawaii, where DeSoto says, yes, we got missioned, but we weren't as forced. It was actually Hawaiians were not that objected to being talked into. And this is an interesting discussion that doesn't make it, any better. But again, in a climate where you don't have to wear anything performatively, right? Because it's about health, and the healthiest way is to be not dressed, more than less. And then so having been put on all these things made you more miserable. And you were, I mean, we get to sweating later because, or we can already say now, because sweating is not a miserable thing, right? It's when you compare it to systems, it's evaporative cooling at its finest. But it got discriminated, right? In many cultures, in Western cultures, it's like, okay, sweating is bad, right? You need to use deodorant or even things that don't make you sweat, right? Or sweat less. Or, if you sweat, you immediately need to, take off your clothes and put it into the washing machine.
Yeah, that's also one of my favorite storylines, the campaign against sweating with the whole thermal comfort pursuit. Because as I mentioned, the comfort definition was no shivering, no sweating. And the thing is, sweating, or the capability of sweating, was so essential for human evolution. That's how we became such great hunters. We lost a lot of hair, so we had more efficient sweating surface, and our sweat glands developed in a way that we became really very good sweaters. That was such a huge step for us in the evolution, because then you can now hunt during the day. You can keep walking. You can just cover a large area and you will find more food. So coming from that, from a few million years ago, to 100 or 200 years ago, where in the Victorian age, there's this saying, horses sweat, men perspire, ladies glow. So you don't want to be at the same level with an animal, with anything else. You want to control the nature. You want to be over nature. You don't want to be something that the nature still dictates your bodily functions. So that desire to control of mankind looks really pathetic in that time scale, because we're talking about some millions of years, and then we're talking about the last century or so. And then, as you said, you decide on the social construct yourself that you made up. No one told you. It came from nowhere. Some people made it up, and then we believe it, and then we make ourselves miserable, but we also keep accepting it as the normal.
Absolutely. This is a great proof because I always say we never rehearse, we play. So you perfectly sense that this slide would be the next. And this is what we should talk to De Soto a lot when you come and visit him in his museum, in the Bishop Museum, which is the main natural science museum in Honolulu. And I argue with him a lot, and I bug him a lot with my stupid questions. And I say, so on the right is a statue of Prince Kuhio. So the royals in Hawaii, when you were talking about, okay, the Victorians were like, okay, we don't want to be primitive, we want to be sophisticated, right? But the term primitive is also to be, reevaluated. We actually, in our parallel research before we got to know each other, which we call tropic hearing, we adopted or readopted the term primitive and primitiva for projects, because we think the primitive ones were the smarter ones than the developed ones. And so the Hawaiian royalty was anything but primitive, but actually the first King Kalakaua was the first king in the world that did a world tour and visited all the other royals, the first one in the world ever. And he saw that his kingdom was under scrutiny, and he was trying to save it, which then at the end unfortunately didn't work out. But when we show you the palace there, it has pictures from where he was part of the crown ceremony of the Tsar, and with a queen and with a German Kaiser and all these things. So in order to play with them, with the others, of course, these are temperate climates, so he needed to put more clothes on, right? but there was also then the status symbol, right? Of like, okay, I'm not the wild one, I'm not the savage one. And so then my criticism and who am I is when he came back, why did he not again put the clothes away? Why do we have a statue here? And maybe it's depicting him when he was sort of over there and not there. But again, the architecture, this is how DeSoto and I started out, really kind of silly and stupid, maybe, that we wanted to pair a piece of second skin and a pair of third skin, and really look at like, okay, is there a correlation, right? And these are the times when then we uncritically basically brought that sort of I apologize to my co-authors of the book who dedicated their time to these projects, but I call it colonial crap. Saying I'm sorry, because again, where we are from, architecture that is that old is laughable young for in the old world, right? So that and the fact that it just came and was just dropped and just not adapted, it was just uncritically basically adopted. And then because you were talking about I think the gender issue, which is obviously a hot topic in various ways, is also one to probably not be afraid of. And I know this from my dear colleague who's not with me anymore, Spencer Leineweber, who basically said, well, the reason why we actually got King Kalakaua was actually quite skeptical of being invaded and, other things superimposed on him. And then it was the queen who said, well, I like the dresses that the white women wear. And then the seamstresses were then saying, well, if we're supposed to make one of these, we need to have environments like the ones at home that we feel comfortable in. So that way it was basically snuck in, according to Spencer, an interesting, again, kind of gender, social, political, cultural kind of thing to just think about. And then when you really, the top part is basically the old ways. And this is what came to my mind for Hawaii, because according to DeSoto, they were living outside in between the halis, which is their huts, most of the time. And only for sleeping and storage, they basically were inside. And on all these halis were actually enclosed. The other ones were open. And down there is what it became now. This is when I came to Hawaii. They charged me with rethinking how the few Hawaiians left now live. And the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is that institution that tries to, give land back to the people. And then they built that misery that you see down there. I mean, these kind of, suburban American tract homes that are totally sealed. And then the cheap way America builds, they realize maybe they need some insulation, and then they foam between the studs, which is like, okay, talking healthy, you want to raise kids or even yourself live in that, and you inhale that on a daily basis. Come on, what's wrong, right? And
here's asthma.
Yeah. So yeah, these are just, again, almost endless encouragements to think about I think what you're talking about is really the mindset. It's really the awareness of things, and certainly we live in a geopolitical, cosmopolitan, everything is intertwined. I mean, in these days, the exposure you get on your phone and in social media to everything. I mean, to first skin and what kind of, it starts with our first skin, what kind of lotion you put on, right? I mean, are you okay, or is plastic surgery needed, and all these things, right? It starts already on the first skin, and then it gets worse and worse in the other skins. Is that fair to
true.
say?
About that, there's something really to me funny that Nick says. the range of skin and hair care products is so interesting because you have to, both for your skin or your hair, first there is either a shampoo or a cleanser that you take the oil out because that's not something we want. But then there are special oils for the skin and the hair that you put it back in. So again, it's this control freak situation that I know it's good, but I want it in a way that I decide, or I want to make it happen. I don't want it to naturally. I don't know. There's this really interesting unresolved psychological problem, but of course it's a big market. So of course you are fed this narrative that this is what you need, this is healthier. Like the article about air conditioning, it is sold as this is healthier for you, but I don't know how many products in like whatever range we have been sold, advertised to as this is what you need, this is what's healthy. But as you said, it's at this point so overwhelming. It's also very difficult to understand what is actually needed and what's not needed. So we're in a weird world right now in that sense. I agree.
And I not before, and that's the beauty of doing this unplugged, that you're saying, I mean, in the what ticks us off our initial, education and the profession out of it, that we're overdoing it with a third skin totally. But now you say we're also overdoing it with a first skin to begin with. And we kind of falsely claim we're interested in making you healthy, right? But when you think through it, it's like Jay likes to call it capital concentration. So it's consumerism driven. And while certainly the second skin is as well, there's a fashion industry and there is all that. But I think there isn't this confusion about or excuse of health in there, right? That's kind of a false. At least it's not so much on my radar that clothing is. I mean, there's obviously, I mean, when we get to ingredients and what's good for you, and obviously synthetics or natural fibers. I mean, there is, when you think about Kick as that sort of low budget store, you read things in the news that there's toxins in there and they get into your skin and into your blood. That. I mean, but on that surface, which we have in the building industry big times as well, right? It's about like started out with asbestos, and now obviously there's other, and we go to carbon footprint of these things. But I think our sort of passion for second skin, it's not as corrupted there yet. I think there is more hope, I think, somehow, now that we're talking about it. I
think that's a very good observation. You're right, because with the first and third, there were really strong claims about this product is very healthy for you, and then it turned out to be the opposite. But I can't remember anything like that in the second skin, you're right.
And then there's also, obviously, and this is what these two slides allude to, there is the aspect of longevity and of what we put out there. And whenever we build something, especially with these days where there's fossil fuel involved, there's power tools involved. I mean, if we were talking, these days, it's like almost every other project is a combination of rammed earth and wood. But are these still like hands-on, right? Is it still like re-ram, or are there power tools involved? Most likely, yes, right? So, I mean, these things we obviously have to consider in all the skins. And this is a princess, Kaiulani, who also was a very smart young royal, and there was a lot of hope. She unfortunately died way too early, but as long as she lived, she was loved by everyone. And so then a hotel chain named a hotel after her, and we dedicated a show that seriously they want to tear down that whole massive hotel, cast in place concrete hotel, and want to replace it with that at the very bottom, you know, and when we're always saying we don't want to see any renderings there anymore, even, you know, models we don't trust anymore. This is like the epitome of like, what is this, right? This is so bad. So this, what they're replacing it with doesn't have more rooms. It wants to look more fancy, but when you look at the old one, it's actually pretty good. So that's obviously another aspect to compare about fast fashion or slow fashion, and how can we repurpose things, and how can we even, yeah, as we say, not build at all, right? And in the spectrum, there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the right time to go back to the problem with the image, the modern image, or the, I mean, we briefly touched it when we were talking about the clothing, the suit, or the Western way of covering your body. This is exactly that too, right? This is a very or there's a very Western modern building image, concrete, glass, and it is something that is like the clothing. It is something that has been imported to different parts of the world, and something to aspire to as a means of showing your caste or social status. Yeah.
This is a building I would, it's my favorite building, or it used to be, because it's, so and I don't know if this is I always feel kind of mixed about my analogy, but the royals talking status, there you go. That was in every culture and in a wine culture, while the normal people were just running around barely dressed. And because of status, the king had this absolutely through the roof coat out of bird feathers, so 4 birds, and it's exhibited, as you will see, in De Soto's museum there. But this building here had a performative cape on, or a feathery, because it was covered with this louver skin, and these louvers were adjustable, and they were covered gold and dull aluminum on the other side. And this is something maybe that's like, okay, well, this is something that we used to be excited about, maybe, but then not anymore, because this is a high-tech solution, you know. But this was in 59. So I always recognize, for like, if we would have that problem in Hawaii and in the world only, that we're like overdoing it, but we're underdoing it, because we're building nothing but glass boxes with no shading whatsoever at all. So here there was a realization and a recognition of the tropics, and of having to protect yourself from the sun, and being caught in time of the zeitgeist at that time, shooting people on the moon and things like that. So, you know, using high tech, I think it was a lovely, because the point I want to make, there's poetry too, or, you know, not too, but there's poetry, and there's poetry in everything. I mean, there's poetry in how we're born, and how beautiful we are, and then how beautiful we age and grace, without being told, you know, to make others rich and buying their stuff, right? And then there's beauty to second skin, which obviously then the industry is again hijacking that and making that, you know, they're making their profit and so on. But that aspect of, I always, you know, when we're together with students, which, thank you again, we had the chance to be in the last fall. There is always this moment when we're just looking at the emerging generations' work and saying, this is beautiful. And we don't mean this reduced to, you know, the aesthetics, but there is a substantial beauty to, like, nature. Nature is substantially beautiful, but it works without any burden to the environment, right? I mean, is that How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And for me, that beauty is, I, I, I would also define it pretty similar to what you said. It's not about how it looks, but if it's about how it lives, maybe
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what it does, what it wants to do, how careful it is about different things around it and inside it. And when we see that sensitivity and thoughtfulness in some students' work, then we both get really excited, and that is beautiful. So I really agree. And that's why we're never particularly interested in the image itself, but the intention. So,
Mm-hmm.
how is this going to live? And
Mm-hmm.
how is this going to make its occupants and visitors or the environments around it or the animals around it live? What is
Mm-hmm.
it doing?
Mm-hmm.
If it's
No, it's
well
beautiful.
thought, then
Yeah.
exactly, it is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would have loved to have seen this building, and they unfortunately raped it, excuse the term, and it's the one in the back. So the one that you see and the left picture in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
back,
yeah.
they were then realizing that they basically
Wow.
naked it without putting any sunscreen on, and then they felt a little bad, so they threw these kind of flimsy little profiles on it that
Hmm.
are doing nothing but that. But then the developments after that are even worse. So it's kind of a really kind of a devolution. And again, these are interesting things for the tropics, right? Where it's about the mitigation of the sun, and
Hmm.
you want the wind to cool you, and the wind needs to go through, right? So
Yeah.
if you put something opaque on you, yes, the sun is not gonna get to you and make you hot, but you still get hot because you're overdressed. So like,
Hmm.
we did a show about screens and grills and gons that, again, I think there is, and the breeze block, for example, that my colleague Lance Walters and Don Hibbert just wrote a book about. The breeze block is a pretty good architectural equivalent of these kind of dresses here, where and as you can see in that little funny, I mean, this is zeitgeist of Magnum
Yeah.
PI back in the 80s. So the guy wears it here, and we're getting a chuckle out of it. And down there is students in David Rockwood's elective, where he had the students develop these skins and these screens, and as an architectural. But again, we're above and beyond and saying, hey, let's start one earlier, which is what we're looking at here now.
Yeah.
So you will see architecture there that's been dressing itself, and this is a building on Kalakaua Avenue. So this is our main strip that most people, I mean, talking beauty and substantial beauty. This is a building that most people agree they find beautiful, they like, and 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 some, depending on, I mean, if you're an engineer, you're saying, oh, these are arches. If you're the maintenance guy, you say, oh, the pigeon poop can rest on it. The tourist says it reminds me of palm trees. And so
Yeah.
it depends on how you look at it, right? So this is an interesting, and there was obviously the movie industry plays into it, like Blue Hawaii with Elvis, and there was this fashion designer Alfred Shaheen. I actually want to share this funny incident recently when I reached out to you and asked you if you want to do this, because I went to my public pool, and there's a little infrared sauna box in that
Hmm.
pool provided, and I was in there, and then someone came and looked and was sort of shy, and I said, come on in, and we talked, and she turned out to be trained in fashion, and then I went to fashion school, and then
Mm.
also worked in the garment industry of performance gear, of Gore-Tex and stuff like that. So whenever you're saying, because you had attempts, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about your previous attempts of getting others excited about, and
Yeah.
somehow ironically, we think ironically, there aren't that many other ones who initially are are getting so excited about it. Why is that actually?
No, that's a good point, because I have this, at this point, I have this pitch that I just do the same presentation to fashion designers or clothing designers. And they're really excited about it because I start with very basics of thermal physiology and the human body, and then um, how many opportunities there are to actually manage it through clothing. I'm throwing in some concept ideas, and they get really excited, but no one really wants to pick it up. I have no idea because I'm also not that familiar with the field. I have been really just trying to cold approach people. I have been introducing myself to different designers through LinkedIn. I had some meetings with them, but just one of these connections developed into a workshop, which was interesting for the students. But I realized there, at least for the students, it was really not at all in how they were thought to design. They were not, when we talk about function, it was really about just sports. The function of a clothing was directly just related with sports, high performance, flexibility, durability, and so on. So, and to bring them to our way of approaching, it didn't click. Maybe there was not enough time, but it was also funny to me to see the parallel with architectural educations, because we still treat sustainable design as a specialty, as an expertise. It's something you can study on top. You can become an architect no matter what. If you want, you can also, as a plus, learn about designing sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit like that for them too, that they design. It's a complete project. They can produce clothing. They can officially be a clothing designer, fashion designer. But if you want also that specialty with performance clothing, that's something extra. So I still don't know how to tackle that, because we have actually the same thing in architecture too, and we can't really solve it either.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you should tell me how we can get over this.
Well, we can ask the audience too, and for that matter,
Yeah.
can we see that pitch at some point also? Can we
Sure.
show that? Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
in the next shows, can we show that? That would be
Yeah, sure.
great. And then maybe we others let us know. For today, we're reaching, I think, a fantastic hour, and hopefully then we pick it up from here next time. But on a sort of ending on a positive note, is that this building here, Don Hibbert down there gave me an article after the fact when we already got the book concluded. So bummer, I guess. Hopefully it sells that well. So in the second edition, I can fix that. I can work that in, where he was actually telling me, as we already pointing out in this previous show here with De Soto and UJ, that this is the architect there. This is Pete Wimberly, and his firm developed into the largest hospitality architectural office in the world at that time. And he was American, and he came to Hawaii, and he said, "This is the most beautiful place I've ever been." So he discarded air conditioning, and he even discarded second skin, as you see him here, without a shirt on. And so in the building, he put his architectural office. And while some other tenants basically then said, "Okay, I have glass and I need AC," he was the one who basically said, I don't. And there's in this article it's fantastically explained that, you know, that was the pre-digital era, of course, you know, in the 60s, and they had all vellum, ink on vellum, which I remember too, that dates me. And then the tradesmen were blowing it away and out of the window. And that was not described as, oh, that's a bad thing, you know, we need to. That's something that they say, isn't that beautiful? We're in Hawaii, we're living there. And so I think he's a great sort of a mentor for us from the past, for that we can again have ourselves be encouraged to keep on investigating in that subject matter. So thank you so much for kicking that off, and I hope we can do many more of these. Squeezing into your many things to do on your plate. I mean, semester is starting, you have grants to write, you have your multiple researches. On top of that, you're the main one pulling the exhibit in the Neue Pinakothek Museum in the past. So you have plenty of things to do. So I hope this is not going to be an extra burden, but maybe relaxation in late evenings. We have to say we have savings time switch again, so that unless UJ make us do it in early and an hour earlier, that will be in even 1 hour later for us. But you know, I hope it's for you as much fun as it is for me to just let the mind be free, floating and thinking about that none of us has sort of figured out yet, or preconceived, or even conceived. It's just there, you know, and we hope this reaches many more of us that can join our continued path.
Yeah, I mean, this is really not that different than our daily conversations when we meet. It's even shorter. So, of course, it's so much fun for me. But yeah, I really am looking forward to the next ones.
Good. Looking forward to that too. And then let's work your pitch in, and obviously your homework whenever you're on the phone with your parents, you know, send them this here and saying, you know, obviously here you have to, I have to do my page, and we just keep on going. Okay, Bilge, thanks so much.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Much appreciated. And then and also we want to say to you, Paula, who's our dear colleague from Valencia, we thought you would be the great one to do that show for. So you know, she has to respond to me. So this is my little hint.
Okay, nice.
The Valencia, and we will obviously be, you know, there will be parts of what we've been doing in there too. But yeah, thanks for thinking that too, that Paula would be the best one to report on that one, so we can continue this one here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Look forward to, well, see you then in 2 weeks already, hopefully.
Yeah, sounds good.
All righty. Till then, bye, Bilge. Bye, everyone.
Bye.